Hello everyone, this is Anya Parampil reporting for the Grayzone. I thought it would be important to take a moment to speak about what's happening in Bolivia. And as many of you who follow me have probably already seen, I spent this afternoon at the Organization of American States, the OAS, hoping to get in as a reporter, as I have many times before, in order to attend the emergency meeting on Bolivia. And I was not allowed to enter the building. I was told by a friendly security guard ultimately that that was the choice of the head of the OAS press office to say that I wasn't allowed to come in, that they didn't accept my press identification, even though I had multiple press passes that were valid and clearly had been issued because I do legitimate reporting. One funny point was the security guard actually told me, for example, that my pass, which had been issued by the non-aligned movement over the summer in Venezuela for my coverage of the ministerial meeting, wasn't accepted by the OAS because the OAS doesn't recognize the legitimacy of the non-aligned movement. I said, well, you realize most of the countries in the OAS are actually members of the non-aligned movement, and it's the largest member organization within the United Nations. 120 out of 193 member states of the UN participate in NAM. It didn't matter. They weren't going to let me in, and I assume that's because of my questioning of U.S. Ambassador Carlos Trujillo in the past, Venezuelan coup official Gustavo Tare, whose staff actually came to harass me while I was standing at the door, said that I was fake news, and, well, all I have to say about that is if an organization which views Tare as a legitimate diplomat doesn't see me as a legitimate reporter, then it's a badge of honor. Why was I at the OAS, though? Why was I so set on getting into that meeting today? It's because the coup in Bolivia, the violent military takeover of the country, which we saw over the weekend, would have been impossible without the OAS's involvement, particularly a report furnished by the OAS, which was not only designed to invalidate Evo Morales' re-election, but also invalidate the entire democratic structure of the Bolivian state and say there was no way for even a re-election process to take place, as Evo said he would participate in on Sunday. And so the report issued by the OAS is really what enabled the military to come in and take over and claim that Evo no longer had a democratic mandate, in spite of the fact he still, no matter what you think about the October 20th election, should have been president until the end of January. And this coup resulted in not only Evo's resignation, but his decision to flee the country out of fear for his life. And there's been a lot of news about Bolivia, but it's very difficult still to keep track of what's happened on a minute-by-minute basis. And so I want to just explain for people, based on my conversations with people who have knowledge of the situation, what is going on. Today, this afternoon, a woman named Jeanine Áñez, an unknown opposition lawmaker, declared herself president not only of the national legislative body, but also of the country. Because it turns out, if you have a military coup and your president and your vice president and the head of your national legislative body are forced to resign, your country is in a constitutional crisis. And so this woman, Áñez, has stepped in to seize the moment, and if it sounds familiar that someone no one had ever heard of before would step into the light and declare themselves president of a country, it's because it's very similar to what happened in Venezuela earlier this year with Juan Guaido. The difference is, in the case of Bolivia, the legitimate, democratically elected, internationally recognized government has already been pushed aside by this assault carried out by the police and the army against Movimiento al Socialismo, MAS, we should be very clear in our understanding of why Evo Morales was forced to resign. It's because there was not only a gun pointed at his head, but a gun pointed at the head of every single one of his major local and prominent ministers, his local officials, his ministers, and the movement as a whole, Movimiento Socialismo, a movement of workers and peasants and farmers. Evo was forced out because there was already a terror campaign against his governors. Mayors of the party had been dragged out of their homes had been set on fire. Members of his party had been tortured publicly by these armed opposition activists, the military, and the police, supported by the United States. And so today, in an act of resistance, mass legislators attempted to deny a quorum to the opposition activists who were attempting to declare this woman, Áñez, president of the country. And I remember from my days on middle school student council what a quorum is. If you don't have the proper amount of legislators or government officials present in order to conduct a meeting or carry out governing processes, you can't actually have a session of Congress with, for example, 2 senators. There has to be a proper amount. And so mass legislators attempted to deny a quorum to the opposition, and yet they went ahead and declared this woman president of the country anyway. And currently in the Bolivian Senate, MAS controls 25 out of the 36 seats. So it would be very easy for the government, the democratically elected officials of Bolivia, to stand up to this coup, except for the fact that the military, the police, these armed opposition fascist terrorists have conducted a campaign of terror, of threat, and of violence against anyone who resists the coup, and especially those lawmakers and ministers with the capacity to stand up and legally resist and fight against this military takeover. And so tomorrow at 4 p.m. in the Bolivian Senate, there will be a session, and the Senate will have the opportunity to block the takeover, the illegal, anti-democratic, and counter-revolutionary takeover of this woman, Áñez. And so the international community, people like you and me, curious about the situation, journalists who are covering the situation, need to be very aware and watching closely what happens in Bolivia. Will these MAS legislators be allowed to attend their meeting? Or will they be killed? Will they be violently prevented from and intimidated from carrying out their duties as the elected officials of Bolivia? Because it's very clear at this point that the OAS and other multilateral international institutions have failed in their job. They're not going to intervene in order to preserve the democratic processes of Bolivia. In fact, they've intervened in order to make sure that structure disappears altogether. It is our job tomorrow to watch, to make sure that the last democratic stand of the Bolivian people, the entire hope is in the hands of these legislators. This is what they've been elected to do, to represent the people. And they are the last piece of the system, of the democratic structure in place in order to resist this military coup. And their lives are in danger. No one is coming to their defense. Luis Almagro of the OAS, the Secretary General, the former Uruguayan foreign minister who has consolidated that organization into its existence as what Fidel Castro once described as the ministry of the Yankee ministry of the colonies. There's a reason Fidel recognized the OAS as such, and there's a reason Luis Almagro has on Nicaragua, on Venezuela, on Honduras, on Chile, on the entire region towed the line of Washington. Washington pays for 60% of the OAS budget. So the international and the multilateral institutions are not going to come to the defense of the Bolivian people, and it is up to us. It is up to us to keep an eye on the situation and to stand with the democratic processes and leaders of Bolivia and the Bolivian people in order to look these coup plotters in the eye and say, no pasaron.